Hello everyone, it's Brett here, Lionheart84, making another one of my rare video appearances with my sort of dishevelled appearance at the moment, seriously lacking in haircuts. Just going to do a very quick talk just for a few minutes about the main reasons or the main problems involved with growing tropical fruit plants in containers in our cold, wet climate, and the three main killers. Basically, you're in control of the environment when your plants are in containers. I'm talking about the more tropical ones now, like mangoes, custard apples, papaya, what else have I got? Ice cream bean trees, various assorted guavas. The three things that kill them really in our climate are extreme cold, drought, and the worst one of all probably root rot. Now, in some cases, the plants will recover from some of these issues, and some they won't. There are other problems. You can have, obviously, you can suffer from disease. The plants can get diseases, and they can suffer from attacks by various pests. But from experience, they tend to be more prone to pest and disease attacks when they've been weakened by other conditions which have caused the plant a lot of distress, and then it makes them more susceptible to attack by various pests and diseases. It's quite rare for the pest infections to actually kill the plant, apart from the fact it's relatively easy as long as you're watching your plants to treat them, whether it's mealybugs or red spider mites or green fly or thrips, or even scale insects. Quite a lot of these pests can be removed manually or treated with organic sprays or soapy water, or even with, if you're not averse to using them, there are various chemicals you can buy that will treat them very efficiently. But the three main killers for me here, and I have lost several plants, are the ones I normally get me a root rot caused by overwatering or suffocation of the roots. However, there are two other risks, and one of them is cold, and the other one is actually drying out, not watering your plants. Now, the danger is if you've got hot, dry weather and you're not watching your plants carefully and checking your soil, if you get a tropical fruit plant and it dries out to the point that the plant collapses, it's quite likely you've lost the plant, because what tends to happen is the roots dry out first with a lack of water and shrivel up and die, and they won't absorb moisture anymore when you water the soil, and then that's rapidly followed by the top of the plant collapsing and the leaves withering and falling off. And once it's got to that stage, you may well be too late to save your plant, because if the roots have actually dried out and completely died, you may not be able to rehydrate them. Sometimes you can save the plant if it's not gone past the point of no return by simply sinking it into a bucket of sort of warm tepid water and leaving it overnight, and hopefully there's a chance the roots will recover. But if you've gone away for a few days holiday or break and your plant hasn't been watered adequately before you go, and you get back, if it's dried out and dead, it's dead. That's pretty much the end of it. There's nothing you can do to revive it. Now, it's the same issue with cold. If you've got tropical fruit plants and you're risking leaving them outside to the point where there's a frost, in a case of a lot of tropicals, they don't have the natural frost protection built into them that hardy plants have. When you get hardier plants, whether they're deciduous or hardy evergreens, they have a certain level of an antifreeze type material in the cells of the plant, which may be in the form of thickened sugars, which basically stop the sap freezing, or the liquids in the water in the plants don't freeze, and therefore the stems and cells don't get damaged. Now, one of the trouble with tropical fruit trees is they don't have this protective mechanism to protect them against frosts and freezing and cell damage. So what tends to happen is, if your tropical plant is outside and it gets cold, or particularly if it freezes, the water and the sap in the cells will expand and it bursts the cell walls, which destroys the tubes that carry the fluids up and down the plant. So literally, and the younger the plant, of course, the worse it is, because there's no bark on the plant to protect it. So if you have a young mango or lychee or longan or whatever it may be outside, a young plant with very thin stems, the first time it gets frosted, that's probably going to be the death of the plants. Now it might not look too bad for a day or two, but the chances are within 2 or 3 days of being frosted, you'll see that all of the leaves and the stems turn black on the plant and it rapidly expires. Now if the roots have been got to by the cold and they've been killed simply because they've been frozen and it's expanded the roots, there's probably nothing you can do to save the plant. I mean, if you've got a larger, tougher plant and it gets lightly frosted, what you'll tend to find is you'll get dieback of the smaller branches and stems, but it may well be that on the larger stems and the trunk at the bottom, where the bark gives a lot more protection to the plant tissues underneath, you may, once the cold weather's gone, find that you start to get recovery and some buds appear from the older wood, and there's a chance the plant will recover. But again, if you've killed your plant from exposure to cold, there's very little you can do about it. Now the condition that I've had more luck with treating is the overwatering of plants that causes root rot and death of the plant, because that's a slightly slower process. Now you'll be aware, if you've seen some of my videos, that I have had this dieback problem caused by overwatering my plants or them being in the incorrect soil or compost, which has obviously caused them to the roots to suffocate. Now the first symptom you will see of the roots being drowned or suffocated is normally the leaves probably will turn yellow on the plant and then start dropping. Citrus it's particularly common with, and various other ones. So the initial thing is you'll see something happening to the leaves, which invariably is simply turning yellow and dropping off, and then the tips of the shoots start to die back, because basically there's no fluid being drawn up from the roots and feeding the plant. So without that, the plant will hold a certain amount of nutrients in its upper stems, but then they will begin to die back, and there's not an awful lot you can do about it if you don't catch it in time. Now I've now carried out, I didn't do it with the mango, I left it too late and the mango had died, but if you can catch it before the roots have all died and rotted off, there is a chance you can save these plants that are suffering from root rot, from overwatering. And what I've been doing, which I've successfully managed with the guava and the kumquat, to feature another video, is to remove the remains of the plant completely from the pot, and using a bucket of warm water remove all of the soil from the existing root system. Now at this point you will be able to see if any roots at all look as if they have got any life left in them, i.e. if they still look healthy and firm, they may have stopped operating because they've become completely waterlogged, which is basically suffocating. They can't absorb the moisture and oxygen from the soil, which is mostly done by the smaller fibrous roots rather than the main roots that go down. The main roots are really the anchor for the plant, and from those the smaller fibrous roots come off. But if you have any main roots that still have life in them, and particularly if you've got any fibrous roots that still look as if they're alive, you've got a good chance of saving your plant. Now that normally involves doing what I've done, which is obviously washing off all the old compost, removing any obviously dead rotted growth, because dead growth won't regenerate, and then unfortunately it also involves cutting the main sections of the plant back to areas that still have signs of green growth in, because there's no point leaving. What you'll find is as the stems die back, they suffer from necrosis, and the dieback gradually travels back through the plant. So you need to cut the plant back to healthy growth if there is any left, and repot it in a lovely open, sorry, flies flying, not floating around me. Repot it in a nice open, free draining compost with plenty of bark in, perlite, grit if necessary, and then a very light, fairly neutral compost. Doesn't want to have a load of food or fertiliser in it because that will burn young roots as they're trying to regenerate. And then what I normally do with mine, once I've got to that stage, is cover them in a sort of like a large clear polythene bubble to give them a humid atmosphere, because what you need to do is try and stop all water loss and evaporation from the remaining parts of the plants that are still left. You have to bear in mind that the damaged roots are not drawing up water and moisture from the soil, so you need to keep the plant in ideally a microclimate of humidity. It's fine if you've got a greenhouse, but I haven't. So what I try to do is, once I've cut the plants back, as I said, I put a large clear polythene bag over the top of the plant, water the soil not excessively, because you don't want soaking wet soil, because that's not going to help the roots. It only needs to be moist, the soil, because once you put the polythene bag over the top, you're not going to get any real water loss from the compost. And then I put them in a nice bright position in the house, but not in a sunny position. They need to have some shade, because you don't want baking sun bearing down on a plant that's effectively virtually died. And then it's just a waiting process really, because the first thing you need to do is try and get a new shoot to start to appear. What I found with the guava is, for the first 2 or 3 weeks after I'd carried out the bare root treatment, I kept seeing green buds appear on the stem and try to break out, and within a day or so of appearing they'd dry up and turn brown, because basically they were trying to grow on the nutrients that were still being stored in the stems of the plant, because the roots weren't drawing anything up, and therefore there wasn't sap travelling up the plant. However, after about 3 or 4 weeks, one of the shoots that broke out from the main stem carried on, developed small leaves and started to grow. Well, once you've got to that stage, the leaves that are coming out will start to feed the plant stem and the plant roots, and it's a two-way thing basically. You'll have nutrients developed from photosynthesis travelling down the stem from the leaves to the roots, and the regeneration of the roots, which is starting to occur, will allow moisture and nutrients to be absorbed into the plant and come up the stem to the leaves. And once you've got that first shoot growing and you've got 2 or 3 inches on it, you will then notice that other shoots and buds that are starting to form will be more inclined to stay green and carry on growing. And of course, the more shoots that regenerate on the plant over the period of time that you're nursing it, then the more they will feed the roots, and also it indicates that the more successful your root generation is coming, because they're now drawing up the moisture and nutrients needed by the leaves. So it is a sort of like it's just a cycle that once you've got past the first stage, you've probably saved your plant. Now if the plant has died back, the roots have completely gone, effectively, even if there's some green stems, the best you could hope to do is possibly cut those stems off and graft them onto another plant, or possibly use them as cuttings, because the roots are completely gone, there's nothing to recover. But as long as you've got something left underneath the soil, provided you cut the plant back and take the load off the roots, if you can keep them in a perfect temperature and humidity, there is a chance your plant will recover. So they're the 3 main killers. Just wanted to talk about what kills my plants in a cold climate in containers, and that's lack of water, which goes without saying for any plant, but it's easy enough to make the mistake and kill a plant off for not watering it. Cold, because that destroys the tissues of the stems and the roots on tropicals, because they have no antifreeze built into their system to protect them. And the biggest killer of all, which in the winter months, especially if the plants are cold, is root rot. Because you've got to bear in mind, these plants are basically dormant in winter in our climate, because the temperature's not warm enough for them to grow, and they're not used to going dormant in their own climate. They're active all year round. So you really have to watch the overwatering and the drainage on the soil. That's the biggest issue with tropicals I found in this country. Obviously, if you're growing your tropicals in containers in a hot climate like Florida or California or the warmer states in Australia, you're not likely to have, you're going to have less of a problem with root rot, because the plants are active all year round and you've got a climate that dries them out. But you're certainly not going to have a problem with the cold. Your main problem is likely to be killing your plants from not watering them. You get a very hot, dry spell, the plants can die very, very quickly. But anyway, I just thought I'd do a quick talk about the problems I face with keeping my tropicals alive here in the UK. Doesn't apply so much to the hardy exotic fruits I've got, because they're more adaptive to the cold and they seem to cope with being overwatered better as well. But obviously just a case of using a bit of common sense. But the one to watch out for me is root rot. Yeah, I do get pests on my plants, but that doesn't normally kill them. It's normally a side effect of other issues that I've got with them. And as I said, the main one for me is root rot. I think I've only killed one plant from not watering it because it was in a room and I forgot about it, and we had a very hot baking day. But it was a seedling, and seedlings easily die off with a day or two of sun because they've got very small root systems and they've got no storage in the stems and the roots for dry spells, whereas a mature plant in a pot will be able to store quite a large amount of water in its roots and stems. You can normally get away with leaving them for a few days if the soil's on the dry side, but they'll tell you when they're too dry simply by hanging over and the leaves going limp. But overwatering's a little bit harder to pick until it's too late. But I have had some success with saving plants, and hopefully you will have the same. So thanks for listening. Anybody who's probably listened to about 2 or 3 minutes of this, but I much appreciate it. Thanks for watching the video. Again, you're welcome to like the video, share it with anyone who you think might be having problems growing their tropicals in climates which are cooler in winter. Obviously, subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already, and if you remember to click the bell, you will get updates on the videos that I post in the future. Catch up with everybody in the next video. Brett out for now. Thanks for watching.